That's what I would do.
Does it feel weird to start drinking out of a bag with a straw instead of a cup?
Yes, it does. It does. I mean, you just think, okay, it's just like drinking Sunny Delight on the ground. It's not, for a lot of reasons. You know, if you could turn it upside down, just open the valve, but it's still nothing's going to happen to it. But if you even gently squeeze it, it shoots like crazy. And it doesn't, you know, whether it's water or red fruit punch or orange juice, which is going to leave a big blotch if you let it free. So you got to be real careful. You really have to learn, and you have to force yourself to close the valve on the straw whenever you're done drinking. So you have to get used to it.
Thank you.
What kind of physical training do you have to do in preparation to go up to space?
So interestingly, the training you do in preparation is kind of geared towards two things. Number one is the training you do on board. You actually have to train on the ground to train on board because the exercise techniques are so unique, and if you mess them up, you can really hurt yourself up there. Biomechanics, the body mechanics of resistive exercise are so different, and the loads are so high that we train pretty heavily just learning how to use the zero gravity exercise machines. But the other thing is the most physically demanding thing we do in space is spacewalking. It's very intensive of upper body and hip and spine. So we do a lot of exercises to strengthen upper body.
Do you think that something sticky could potentially work as a thing that would reel in space debris?
Possibly. So yeah, perhaps. And here's where my reservation is. If something is getting space debris, that means it's outside. So it's in vacuum. It's in full sunlight sometimes, except when it's on the other side of the world, and then it's in shadow. So it's going to go from really high temperature to really low temperature and back and forth, cycling back and forth as it goes around the world. And it's also subjected to something we call monatomic oxygen, which is an oxygen species that hangs out in low Earth orbit that really degrades materials. So the answer is yes, if you find the right sticky stuff that can work effectively in that environment. And good luck with that. That's a materials question, but yeah.
How do you entertain yourself in space?
Mostly I watch my crewmates. You know, you're never bored up there. It's impossible to be bored, number one. Number two, you will never get enough window time, as we call it. When you're looking at the Earth, your home planet from space, it's overwhelming. It's unbelievable. And at the end of, you know, my day 199, all I wanted to do was look out the window. So, you know, it's just one of those things that the world is amazing, it's beautiful, it's dynamic. Anytime anybody had any free time, we'd grab a camera and go to the window. Just hanging around with my shipmates around the galley table for dinner was awesome. Some people watch movies, read books. I didn't do any of that. It was just way too much to do. And I mean, the idea of having to entertain myself, we watched exactly one movie during my 6.5-month flight because that's all we had time for. It's just so magical where you are. I mean,
What happens when your toilet breaks?
Wow. So one of the times I was up there, both of our toilets broke, which really sucked. And now we had a Soyuz spacecraft there, which had a very small potty on it. We were using that, and you just have to fix it as fast as you can. So guess what? We carry spare parts. We figure out what's the most likely thing to fail, and we carry spare parts to fix it. And you just stop everything and fix it. So, yeah.
Did you ever have to deal with deadly no-see-ums?
Deal with what?
Deadly no-see-ums.
Deadly no-see-ums, not to my knowledge. No, we didn't. So when I think of no-see-ums, I think of insects that bite you.
I mean like fungi, bacteria.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, you're breathing that all the time up there because it's, you know, nothing settles out. We actually do microbial monitoring of our habitable modules all the time. So once a week, we will actually sample the air for microbes. We'll sample surfaces. We'll go to the places that are touched the most by humans or by food preparation. And we also test our drinking water. And if it gets too high, then we'll actually, if the microbial count gets too high, we'll actually disinfect the water a little bit more. So yeah, we look at that, but we try to catch it way before we get affected by it. So that is an excellent question because we're in an enclosed environment.
What are some solutions for radiation that you use?
avoid it. And frankly, I mean, there's nothing you can do. You can't turn it off. So when we think about deep space crews going from Earth to Mars, the way to avoid it is to shorten that trip. And we used to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we would harden the body or how we would fly more shielding. But the answer is speed. The answer is propulsion, engines that will get you there in a few weeks instead of 6 months. So believe me, the biggest answer to radiation is flying fast. And then once you get there, burrowing underground. So those are the big answers.
Do you know anybody who suffered under the effects of radiation, like a friend or, someone?
Well, so in our world, we get a lot of radiation, but not enough to cause, say, what acute syndromes or acute sickness. There have been nuclear accidents where people have gotten that. That is not. What we worry about more is the long-term risk of cancer. I can definitively say, no, I don't know, at least in our world, of people who have had to suffer from radiation problems.
Thank you.
Little super genius, you've been here before.
Why does fire go on without no oxygen?
What's that? How do you go on without it?
Why does fire in the rocket? How does fire keep on going without oxygen?
Oh, how does fire keep on going without oxygen? Like people, it doesn't. Because when you see a rocket engine going, that means fuel and oxygen are coming together to burn, with some exceptions. But when you see a chemical rocket taking somebody out of orbit or away from the Earth up into orbit, that means oxygen and fuel are coming together somehow. The oxygen could be in the form of pure oxygen, or it could be in a chemical like nitrogen tetroxide. But it's always oxygen and fuel burning, because that gives you really huge thrust. Now, having said that, we do have some advanced rocket engines that don't use oxygen. They use electricity and heat to heat up a propellant that doesn't necessarily need oxygen. But that doesn't give us nearly the thrust to get out of orbit.
How do you wash your clothes in space?
It's easy. We don't. I mean, for a couple of reasons. You don't get dirty up there. For two, I mean, there's no dirt. And you float inside your clothes. You're not really in close contact with them. So it's not like your clothes soak up a lot of sweat or anything like that, except your exercise clothes. So we literally, like, a shirt is good for 6 months, and exercise clothes we use until they're really, really stiff, and then we burn them. We put them in a returning cargo module, and we just let it burn up like trash. So we do not wash. It's not a good use of resources, because that takes water and power and all that.
And how many gallons of fuel does it take to get up into orbit?
Boy. Okay, so I haven't been asked that one before. Gallons, wow. Okay, so what I can tell you is that for the shuttle, it was a 220,000-pound vehicle, the space shuttle itself, and it took about 16,500 gallons per second of fuel for the main engines to get us up there, not counting the solid rocket boosters. So do the math. We never talk about gallons. We're typically talking about tons of fuel, so a lot.
How long have you been an astronaut?
I've been an astronaut for 18 years, 3 months, 2 weeks, and today. 18 years, I'll put it that way. Seems like a long time. You're welcome.
So if you're in space for like over a year, when you come back down to Earth, what physical problems and mental problems may you face?
Well, mental problems depends on who you are, I think, to begin with. Physical problems, so everything we know mostly is based on 6-month missions nowadays. So your bone and muscle weakness we worry about. Again, you soak up radiation, cancer risk. There's immune system changes. The cardiovascular system changes magnificently. Most of these changes are actually not harmful, believe it or not. They're adaptive. They make you better for zero gravity. So when you come back to Earth, you have to readapt, but it's not that you're necessarily damaged. So the big things we worry about are weakness, and because your circulating blood volume is lower, it's adapted for 0G but not for 1G. It takes a while to put that back to build new red blood cells. And the biggest thing is rebooting your guidance system, as we call it, getting your sense of balance, motion control, and whatnot back in order. And that can take a while. But in general, you know, our Russian colleagues flew 4 people for a year or more decades ago, and they did very well. So, and all that is very well documented, by the way.
If you're in space for a long time, how do you communicate with other people other than the space control?
Very good question. We have satellite links, which gives us a very good broad bandwidth connection to the ground. And we actually have internet protocol telephones, 6 lines out from the ISS. So I can dial any number on the planet when I'm up there. So I talk to my wife every day. I talk to my kids about their homework and stuff.
Wow, thanks.
Yeah.
About how many times a week do you have issues on the outside of the International Space Station?
What kind of issues are you thinking about?
Just general maintenance things.
Not that often, fortunately. Probably, I'm going to say about every 6 months, some box on the outside goes bad. Now, box could be a power controller, a pump, a solar battery, or something like that. Goes bad can mean it reboots itself or it totally fails. And sometimes we actually have to go out there and fix it or swap it out. So probably average of once a year, something fails that makes us go spacewalk specifically to go do it. And sometimes that can be 3 spacewalks to fix it.
Thanks.
How sad was it when you left your parents?
That's a really good question. How sad is it when I left my parents? It was very sad. I mean, actually, I would say the hardest part about spaceflight is leaving your parents and your children. I have 5 children and an amazing wife, and boy, that was hard. And frankly, most of us, when they say, what do you miss most when you're in space, people expect us to say ice cream or hot showers, but it's your family more than anything. And a lot of us figure, I mean, if our families were up there with us, we'd stay in space forever. So, yeah, I miss my family more than anything.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What is the physical toll on your body in space, and what is the difference in your height and weight?
Okay, so in zero gravity, again, we talked about losing muscle, losing bone, losing circulating blood volume, red blood cells. It changes shape. So let's talk about that a little bit. You actually do get a little bit taller. For me, I grew about 1.2 inches, and I'm not a spring chicken. The really young people could grow 2 inches or more in standing height. So that's one thing. Your chest actually gets a little bit bigger, more in the forward to back distance. Your waist gets smaller, and you assume this new body posture, this zero gravity body posture. And typically, again, people would tend to lose weight until recently when our food system was upgraded. So that body shape and posture works for you up there. It doesn't work very well for you down here. And I can tell you, get back to your pre-launch height within a few hours of coming home, so you don't get to keep it. But you do have to accommodate it. I can tell you that I barely fit in my spacesuit because I was too tall. And there's some people that we've actually had to really change things so they could fit their suits and their seats, the couches, the reentry couches. So your body does change shape.
Is there any diet you can have or medicine you can take to reduce the effects of radiation?
Wow, there is a lot written on that very question. We worry about radiation causing what we call oxidative damage because, amongst other things, it can hit a DNA molecule and damage it directly, or it can hit other chemical species and cause what we call the formation of oxygen-free radicals. So there are certain foods, certain vitamins and supplements that are free radical scavengers, antioxidants, and it is hoped and proposed that certain diets and certain medications high in those things can protect you against radiation. The data are not very good yet, but we're still looking for compounds. That's a good question.
Thank you.
How do you deal with religion in space?
The same way you deal with on the ground. You know, people take their faiths with them. And a lot of times those faiths are challenged or overwhelmed by what you see up there, there's no question. But, you know, we've had bits of everybody up there. We've had Christians, Muslims, Hindus, you name it. And everyone gets along really well up there, quite frankly. And, you know, we talk frankly about everything up there. There are some folks who will actually watch a church service once a week, or they'll have a pastor talk to them sometimes directly. We had the patriarch of the Orthodox Church talk to us on Russian Orthodox Easter. So whatever you take with you, you exercise up there.
Thank you. How do you take showers in space?
That's another easy one. You don't. Think about a shower. What is it? It's water falling on you, right? Well, nothing falls. Water gets on you in the shower and it runs off, and well, that wouldn't happen anyway. So the Russians tried to build a shower. The Americans tried to build showers on space stations. In both cases, they failed miserably, so we don't do it anymore. You just do sponge baths up there, and you can get by with 8 ounces of water a day to clean yourself, and it works just fine. But showers are great on Earth, but nowhere else.
Is human genetic modification going to be a thing to help prevent radiation?
Is human genetic modification going to help radiation? I hope not, because well, first of all, we don't understand all the effects of radiation on the human body. In fact, we have a very poor understanding of it, to be quite honest about it. So if you started modifying, you may cause some problems you don't understand. And we're a long way from that complete understanding of what we would modify. Secondly, we don't want to open a space frontier to a highly selected, modified group of people. We're trying to open the space frontier to humanity. So the non-genetically modified but technologically protected humanity. So probably not.
I also heard from the same source that Australia was fake, so not surprising.
I mean, I'm not saying that people aren't talking about it. It has not been that long since a NASA person asked me to think about it.
What was the worst cause to you or the ISS when you were on the ISS twice? Yeah, or the worst thing happening to you?
The worst thing happened. Fortunately, I mean, we actually didn't have that many bad things happen. We came close, certainly a couple times. One thing is we had, we plussed up to 6 crew during my watch, and we had a device that scrubbed the carbon dioxide out of the air for us, and it failed, talking about reliability of systems. And we were within probably 48 hours of half demanning the station, meaning we would have had to send 3 of our crew members home because we couldn't scrub the carbon dioxide out of the air. This was never designed to be fixed on orbit, but we fixed it, fortunately, and we were able to keep going. But that was kind of a close call for us.
One more question.
Yeah.
How big of a problem is mold when you're growing plants in space?
It's a really good question. It is a big problem, and to get around it, we have to really control the humidity. It's mostly about humidity control where you're trying to grow your plants. And if you do that, you can cover the mold pretty well. But we have found places where we lost humidity control and didn't know it, like behind one of our hygiene stations. We pulled it back once because it smelled funny, and there was this big black blotch. It looked like it was going to reach out and jump at you, but it was just mold that grew there because the humidity just coalesced or condensed there, and it was a great place to grow mold. So you really have to watch the humidity.
Okay, we'll squeeze one last one in here, and then we're going to have to give our astronaut a break before the 7 o'clock.
Can I have your signature?
Oh.
I tell you what, your call, but if we break, I can do that real quick.
Okay. All right. Okay, so everyone, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, Dr. Barrett. I look forward to seeing all of your projects in December. If you want to send me progress reports, I love reading those. I love to know what you guys are up to. Please exit through the top stairs so we can bring in all of the crowd for 7 o'clock. Thank you. All right, while you guys are finding your seats, we have a quick announcement from one of our teams.
Hi, I'm Arunima from the Robotic Animals Go to Space team, and another upcoming FLL event is a presentation at Intel at 11 o'clock on October 27th, and Dr. Jitendra Joshi, he is the integration lead for advanced exploration systems in NASA. He agreed to come to Portland and give a presentation about human habitation in space. We'll send more information out in a day or two. Thank you.
And that'll come out in your Team Blast coaches, so if you're interested in attending that event as well, we will have information in the Team Blast. Hello, First Oregon. Oh, they're almost here. Hi, First Oregon. There they are. How many of you guys came from out of Portland today? Anybody in this crowd? All right, there you are. Where'd you from? Shout it. Oh, okay, that's kind of close. We had Umatilla last hour, but I'm not expecting any of our travelers at the 7 o'clock because they have to take the buses all the way back. Yeah, it's a bumpy ride. Well, welcome. I am Lordy Wetzel. I'm the first LEGO League program manager for the state of Oregon. And it is my honor to be here in our 18th season of First LEGO League in Oregon. Once again, Intel is our title sponsor for this season. So let's give a big shout for Intel. And tonight and tomorrow we have partnered with OMSI to bring in the NASA astronaut, Dr. Michael Barrett. So thank you, OMSI. Dr. Barrett is a NASA astronaut who has been on 2 missions to the International Space Station and has spent 199 days in space. He is also a resident of Camas, Washington. So this is our astronaut, everyone. There we go. He is a medical doctor and has worked with NASA. I got to find where it's written down. I'm sorry. Currently serves NASA's International Space Station operations and integration branches to handle medical issues and on-orbit support. So I'm going to let Dr. Barrett have your guys' attention.
All right. Thanks very much. Okay. It's an honor for me to be back here, and I'm always to get back, partly because I grew up here, and I just love this part of the world. And if it's just about it, you guys best parts of one of the best planets in the universe, and any chance I get back, I get to get back here is great. And I was a kind of an OMSI kid. I took a lot of classes. I built telescopes. I climbed mountains. I did marine biology. I did a lot of stuff at OMSI. But every time I come back here, I see that there's opportunities that just didn't exist when I was you guys' age. So I'm really psyched to see things like this, like the Robotics Challenge, because it really makes you do things that are important to NASA. One of those is teamwork. And the other one is building new technological solutions to problems, and that's what we do at NASA all the time. So I don't know how many of you found out, but is it always easy to work in a team? No. No, and sometimes that's one of the hardest things, but a good team takes time to build, and then it can be so amazingly effective when you find out each other's strengths and what everybody has to contribute. And you're building something new and exciting and maybe discovering something new for the first time as a team, and that's just one of the best things ever. As noted, I'm a medical doctor. I didn't mention this during the last group, but you know, really the human body in space is my passion. What the human does to adapt to zero gravity, to weightlessness, and kind of become an extraterrestrial is an amazing thing. We didn't anticipate it when we started flying in space. There's continual surprises. We learn new things all the time just by hanging out in space with some of the new tools that we have and the accumulated time we have. And we are learning things about the body, about physiology, about medicine that we otherwise would never have learned if we didn't fly in space. Because when you remove gravity, what a dominant force it is, when you take that out of the equation, you find things you didn't know existed. So I'm telling you that because I'm not going to tell you anything more about space medicine, even though it's my passion. Tonight we're going to talk about basically human spaceflight and robotics. And that's why you're here. And certain things about human spaceflight and robotics that I want you to know as your heads are right now full of teamwork and robotics. But first we'll talk about spaceflight. And the reason is I want you to get an idea. If you're thinking about a robot in space, the environment that the human undergoes to get into space, to live there, to work there is pretty much the same as robotic systems, and both of them are very important to us. Now, a little bit about my own spaceflight experience. This was launch day in March of 2009, my long mission. And a couple of interesting things. This was, we were walking out to the launch pad. In the middle is Gennady Padalka, my Russian commander, and we were flying the small Russian Soyuz spacecraft. And he is widely known to be one of the best in the business. Actually, by now, he has the most accumulated days in space. I think he's at 880 or something like that, over 5 long-duration space missions. And the guy is just becomes an extraterrestrial animal up there. With gravity, he's so at home. It's really quite amazing, and he's an amazing guy as well. On the left is Charles Simonyi, and he was one of the early founders of Microsoft. He also kind of brought the development of the Microsoft Office suite together. Not a professional astronaut. He was a paying tourist, if you will. We call them spaceflight participants, but basically a paying tourist. He paid over 40 million bucks to fly with me, and I kind of thought it was funny because I was getting paid to do it, and he was paying that much. But the real amazing thing is that he was on his second flight. He had already done it once before, and he wanted to do it again. Now, Charles is not your basic millionaire. He is also a PhD computer scientist. He's a type-rated jet pilot. He's a big spaceflight enthusiast. And he actually bought the capsule that we launched and landed in and donated it to the Museum of Flight in Seattle and funded the space wing up there. So if you ever go up to Seattle and you see the Soyuz capsule, that's our capsule that Charles bought and has really done a lot for that endowment. And actually, he'll go down there and talk to kids just to kind of talk about spaceflight. So he's one of my heroes. Actually, he's become a good friend. So a very unusual crew. When you think about what the normal astronaut crew looks like, multinational, multi-professional, this is our new era, and it's going to get even broader, and spaceflight opportunities are going to open up quite a bit more. So I think we were a good harbinger of that. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple of numbers that I want you to understand very well because they're reflective of the forces we go through when we fly in space. Leaving the planet, when we fly into space, how long do you think it takes for us to get into orbit from the time we leave the launch pad? Yeah. 20 hours, we'll put that out there, yeah? 8 minutes, yeah? 3 hours? How about up there? 5 hours? How about way up there with the 2 hands before you hurt yourself? No, the blue. Yeah. A week? Okay. Wow. Okay. So the answer is in here. Actually, the last group guessed everywhere from hours to the fastest was 30 seconds. I was trying to think of what my human body would be like if we actually made it up there in 30 seconds. But 8.5 minutes is about right. So somebody said 8 minutes. That's pretty darn close. So 8 minutes, 30 seconds, 8 minutes 45. Shuttle, Soyuz, Gemini. We've had some other ones that went a little bit shorter and went a little longer, but that's a good number. How fast do you think we're going? You can shout it out. I can't see you anyway. Okay. Okay, that's great. So wide range, but I heard somebody say 25,000 kilometers an hour. That's as close as about 28,500 or so. Equivalent to about 17,500 miles per hour, and that is orbital velocity. So what I'm asking you to do is kind of bake those two numbers in. If you remember those, believe it or not, those are going to come up again as you go along your educated pathways. So about 17,500 miles an hour is sustainable low Earth orbital velocity. If you go faster, your orbit raises. If you go too fast, you'll leave orbit and head to the moon or somewhere else. If you go slower, your orbit decays, and you'll get too close to the atmosphere, and you'll re-enter. So that's about what we want to be, 17,500 miles an hour, about 5 miles per second, roughly 8.2 kilometers a second. But that means we're going around the world 16 times a day. Every 90 minutes, we circle the Earth, right? So think about that, 16 sunrises and sunsets every day. And that's about the numbers that bound the acceleration that we have to do to get there. Now, if we really got up there in 30 seconds, we'd be squeezed into a pancake. And if it took a week, that'd be great. But we don't want to spend that long in the atmosphere. So I've left the Earth twice. What I like to call the commuter car, the Soyuz. I want you to think about, oh, that didn't work. I want you to think about the mission of this. Let's get some sound in here. And I like to think of it as a commuter car because basically it takes 3 people to work and not much more than that. It doesn't have much space in it, but to take 3 people to work, you park it in space, and then 6 months later you turn the key and it goes. It's incredibly reliable. This was our launch out of Baikonur. Boy, this is not behaving. There we go. So Baikonur is in Kazakhstan, one of the ex-Soviet republics, and basically this thing sits there, builds up its engine thrust, and when the thrust equals the weight of that rocket stack, it just lifts off very, very gently, and you can barely even tell you've left the pad, except the clocks start to count up, and then you start to feel the G-forces building, but there's very little vibration, there's not much shake, rattle, and roll, it's a very gentle liftoff. And as we're clearing the tower and heading up, the Gs are building. And before we hit the first stage separation, we're at about 4 Gs, 4.2. So we weigh about 4 times our body weight. It's all chest to back. And it's actually a very pleasant ride up there. By this time, we've trained for years, and we're very focused and really ready to go. This is a beautiful day to launch. It was absolutely fabulous. And that shroud, when that pops off at about 2 minutes, sunlight streams through the window. It was absolutely amazing. So whatever you're in, you still have the same rules that you have to follow. This was actually a Soyuz launch that I was in attendance of in July of this year. My very good friend, also a medical doctor, Serena Onion, was on this rocket, and this was a very, very close-up view, not by a handheld camera, but there was a famous NASA photographer whose name I will not give you, whose camera melted. We have a view of this absolutely melted piece of plastic and glass and whatnot, because it got a little too close. Second launch was on the space shuttle, and very different. Instead of a straight vertical stack, you have offset boosters, 7.2 or so billion pounds of thrust, and a very rough launch. When those solid boosters light, it's just a lot of shaking. You can't really see it from the outside so much, but if you've ever seen in-cabin video, you see the people are just shaking like crazy. This is a view from one of the external boosters looking down, and you see that the plume is just an amazing thing, mostly from those external solids. And this is a separation when the solid boosters burn out and we continue up. We got that big fuel tank and our 3 main engines. The solid boosters have burned out and they are falling back to Earth. So that's kind of what it looks like. As soon as those solids fall away, it gets very smooth. It's quite amazing. You still feel the G loads, but all of a sudden it's a very, very smooth ride. It was then reminiscent of the Soyuz. So no matter the vehicle you're in, the numbers are still the same. It's 17,500 miles an hour. You have to go from 0 to that in about 8.5 minutes or so. And this is a picture of that. That was the last flight, by the way, of the Space Shuttle Discovery, so it was a real honor to be on that flight. Who knows what that is? ISS. Okay, great. How many have seen the ISS fly over? Okay, a good number of you, and that's really wonderful because it's an amazing thing. There's several apps that will help you figure out where it's going to be. One of them is called Spot the Station, actually, which is one of the best. And it is the third brightest object in the sky next to sun and moon now. So the idea that the third brightest object up there is something that we built, that humans built, is quite amazing. There are many countries, 15 or 16 countries, that actually contributed directly to hardware and crew for the space station. And this picture is very special to me, because I actually took this picture from STS-133 where we were doing a fly around, but it was a very happy coincidence because we had large cargo vehicles, the foreground, the white cargo vehicle with the X-wing solar panels, and the Japanese cargo vehicle in the front. The first one is European. They added a lot of volume to the stack. And then we had 2 Russian Soyuzes and a Russian Progress cargo vehicle. When we docked the shuttle to it, we were over 35,000 cubic feet of volume. It's huge. And one of my classmates, actually, who flew with me on the shuttle mission, I had already lived there for 6 months by that time, and he was a submariner by training. before he became an astronaut. And I flew him around the station, kind of showed him around, and I asked him if this were a submarine, how many people would be on it? He said, 130, for the comparable volume that we had. So we have a crew size of 6. And so people think we're claustrophobic and that we're bumping into each other all the time. You couldn't be farther from the truth. You could lose someone up there, which we did for a while, to be real honest. And the darn thing is just impossibly beautiful. When you're approaching this thing and you're just seeing there hanging in space above the Earth, it is really amazing. That was the wrong button. That was definitely the wrong button. Hang on here. We've been having all sorts of little technical issues, which are probably half mine. Come on, you sucker. Here we go. Okay, so I call this the Zillow listing because I kind of want people to know what the real estate really looks like. What characterizes the ISS? Why do we work there? Why do we build it? And what good is it to us? Well, first of all, it is about 240 nautical miles high, 265-ish or so statute miles. And it raises and lowers with atmospheric heating and with our boosting and whatnot, so it's dynamic. It's not always at the same altitude. And it is at what we call a 51.6 degree orbit, which means it goes between 51.6 north latitude and 51.6 south latitude. And even though it's always going in a circle, it looks like kind of a squiggly line, a sine wave over the ground. But we can see all of the Earth at those latitudes just by flying directly over it. So we have a tremendous platform to do Earth observation. Of course, one of the big things we have is weightlessness. There's not a perceived gravity up there, so we can study things in either microgravity or free fall. Weightlessness, I think, is a better term. We do have a sea level pressure and atmosphere. So we don't have oxygen there. We have a mix of oxygen and nitrogen, just like here, 20% O2 oxygen, about 80% nitrogen. So it's air. I mean, it's basically air at sea level pressure. Again, the max volume would be 35,000 cubic feet. Now, if you're looking at a real estate listing, square feet means nothing up there because there's no floor. I mean, floors have no meaning. We really look at volume, what we call habitable volume, where people could live, because you can use every surface. And the views are great. I mean, there's stunning waterfront views. And like one time you're looking at the Atlantic seaboard, and then you're looking at the Mediterranean. I mean, the views are just amazing. It's close to public transportation. We have several cargo vehicles that service it. We have the Russian Soyuz, and pretty soon we'll be using the SpaceX Dragon and the Boeing Starliner to get people back and forth. I do have to point out that there are 6 bedrooms, small crew cabins, 2 bathrooms. It is relatively furnished, but relatively mean, there's no chairs because nobody sits because you're in zero gravity. So there's not much furniture, actually. Semi-closed loop ecosystem, which means about 85% or so of our water is recycled, whether that's hygiene water or urine. So if you pee in the toilet, you're going to be drinking that in your coffee next week. But that's a good thing. Because when you think about it, it costs many thousands of dollars to launch a kilogram of anything. And if you don't have to launch water, it's a really good thing. People used to think we were doing that for a long time, for decades. We just started doing that about 8 years ago, or 9 years ago or so. And I was actually, I had the dubious distinction of testing that system. Why is it doing that? I would just say that it's important to know where your next drink is coming from when you're in space. And you're going at 17,500 miles an hour. There we go. Now, we're going to pretend that 6 months went by, because we're talking more about robotics today than life in space. But again, I'm concentrating on the dynamic forces that are important to us, whether you're human or robotic. For the Soyuz, let's see, I remember this was very tacky music, so we're going to turn that down. For the Soyuz, it's a small capsule. Remember, I equated it to a community car. And a commuter car. It's really amazing in that it's reliable enough that every time, 6 months of quiescence, you get in there, you turn everything on, and it works. You undock and you come home. And this has been the most reliable human carrier. Isn't that fun? Let's see. Boy, my laptop is really, it's a robotic system, I'm sure. Anyway, we don't have a chase plane, so that was a computer-generated view. But this is looking out my window As you're re-entering, you're dumping all that velocity with frictional drag with the atmosphere. So what you're seeing there is our window melting because it's so hot. It's about 3,200 degrees out there. And you're also seeing the sparks go by as the heat shield on our tail end there is ablating. So that's coming apart, and that actually helps to dissipate the heat as that thing ablates. The phase change helps us. And then we're going so fast, making so much heat that the very rarefied atmosphere up high in the atmosphere starts to glow. It leaves a plasma trail. So all those things are happening. Your window is melting. On the right side there, you see it's kind of white hot. Excuse me, on the left side, because that's the leading edge. And it's melting. It's actually getting thinner on that edge and getting thicker as the glass runs over to the other side. And eventually it totally sooted over. You couldn't see out of it at all. But fortunately, that was a sacrificial window, and that blows up. I'm going to kill the sound again, and hopefully it'll stay killed. This is too funny. Come on. But I want to show you a little bit more about how the Soyuz, there we go. Okay. There we go. All right, so we separate somewhere, you can see the Mediterranean Sea there. We actually come in over the Mediterranean, and we separate about there and enter the atmosphere at about 400,000 feet equivalent altitude. So you can see the heat again. This is a view behind the shoulder. We actually have GoPros mounted in here. And the windows, that burned off one just blew off, actually. And so you can actually see through it again, because that was a sacrificial window pane. The chutes come out high, and anytime a chute comes out high in the atmosphere where it's more rarefied, it gives you quite an opening shock. We tighten our restraints the most we can, typically when we're under 4 Gs or so. So that means we're really hunkered down into our seats, and we can tighten them down good, because you want them tight for impact. So we come down on a single parachute. And now we're going to cock the seats up. See, that happens really quick so that you get in a really good position to handle that impact, because it's going to be quite a bump. So here you see us coming down about 1 meter above the ground. We'll fire engines, boom, flash. And then this is what it looks like from the ground. It carves a big dust hole out of the ground, and then you're down. Boom. That's kind of what it looks like to us. It is quite an impact. It is quite a bump. But when you consider, again, you've used all of these systems, rockets, parachutes, drag. We've got special seats that take the shock. All those work in combination to go from 17,500 to 0 and do it safely. And it really does work quite well. Shuttle, very different vehicle. This was our landing on the shuttle, and I'm showing you this not just for nostalgia, but we're actually building a mini shuttle, contracting with Sierra Nevada, so it'll be a small version of the shuttle for both cargo and people eventually. Obviously a winged vehicle. I told you it was a rough launch, and it is, but it's a very gentle landing. So you really get that back at the end, and it was kind of nice. It kind of lands like a cargo vehicle. A glider, there's no chance of going around if you don't get the runway quite right. Fortunately, we always got the runway right, and the same will be true of our new mini shuttle. Although the mini shuttle will probably have a paraglider to go with its wings, so that gives us the most efficient use of weight and lifting services. But it was really interesting after landing in the middle of the Kazakh steppe for one flight, and then 1.5 years later landing at Kennedy Space Center, just kind of out there in the swamp with alligators and turtles and everything. Typically we land in fairly remote places so that we don't hit anything important, so if we miss our target. So that's kind of the space flight stuff. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the robotics part. Now, all of those forces I was telling you about pertain both to humans and to any robotic systems that you might be using in space. Now, when people think about space flight and they think about robots, mostly people are thinking about R2-D2 and C-3PO and whatnot. One big question is why should a robot look humanoid? And I kind of commend Star Wars, actually, because they kind of pioneered the idea of these non-human looking robots that still had some personality to them. But what's the advantage of a robot helping you, whether in zero gravity or on the surface? Hold your thoughts. We'll talk about this at the end. But it is a thought. It's something we actually discuss a lot. So why does it have to be humanoid? We've already got humans up there. We can do that kind of stuff. Does it help to have them? Well, turns out it probably does. Rovers, Those are very real to us to enable planetary exploration, hopefully potentially out of the solar system at some point, but something very familiar to people, the Curiosity rover, and then, of course, so all the other things that you might think about, some of which we'll show you. When we use robotics on the space station, mostly we're talking about the arms that are built by the Canadian Space Agency. So on the right half of this, you see the big 60-foot long robotic arm that is attached to the station. It can actually walk from one point to another to the station, and it's controlled from the inside. And it looks like a very simple system. It is not. It has several motors. It's 7 degrees of freedom. It has 2 fully redundant computer logic strings that run it with some degree of AI, if you will, so that it knows how to safe itself if it encounters a problem it doesn't like before the people are aware of the problem. And it's a very, very sophisticated robotic arm. At the end of it is even a bigger, a more sophisticated package, the Special Purpose Dexterous Manipulator, the SPDM. And NASA's full of ridiculous acronyms, so I apologize for that. But this is several arms on the end of the big arm, and we can move this to a place where, say, a box has failed, a power controller, and we can hold it in place and pull out screwdrivers and bolt drivers and remove a piece of hardware and swap it out. I mean, this thing can actually replace hardware on the station. So it means that you've done it from the ground or from the inside control station, and you didn't have to suit up and go out on a spacewalk to do it. So it gives us a capability and a test forward plan that really helps us advance our use of robotics. And both of these, again, are very smart systems that we use pretty much every day. And so they enable a lot of things that we otherwise couldn't do without them. Now, just trying to bring people and robots together a little bit. Now, some of you may recognize Robonaut. Robonaut got a lot of press coverage. We took Robonaut to space on Discovery on STS-133, and I swear he got a lot more coverage than the rest of us did. And why? Because he looks like us. He's a humanoid-looking robot, and if nothing else, that really captures imagination. It causes us to latch on to this system as one of us, and we kind of expect it to perform like one of us and be a noble member of the crew. A very smart, very high-tech, really a tech demonstrator of a robot. Now, you'll notice that there's no legs, so from the waist down, there's nothing. We actually flew the legs up separately on another mission. And when you put the legs on this thing, and if he's got his feet attached to the floor, if you will, of station, he's 8 feet tall or so, and could really creep you out at night if you encounter him out there. And he has to do what we do on station, go from one handrail or one foot restraint to another, because they can't fly any better than we can. So it's very interesting to see them having to emulate us. If they look like us, then they have to move like us. They have to work like us. They have to park like us. On the other hand, you've got Luke Skywalker's new hand here on the other side. Now, that may seem a little bit far off science fiction-y. A couple of weeks ago, I was actually at a think tank seminar where we were looking at the possibilities of robotic surgery in space. What path forward should we take on that? How much of it should be robotic, telerobotic, autonomous robotic with artificial intelligence? So there's a lot of thought on that because we don't have a lot of people. If a robot can help us replace a person on a small crew, we really want to do that. And then, of course, there's the whole field of orthotics, artificial limbs, or exoskeletons where you put those on over your limbs and just make you much, much stronger. So all of these things are actually being done. I mean, it's really quite amazing work. And a lot of it pertains to spaceflight. Now, some personal experience with robotics. Now, again, I'm a medical doctor. I had to take a lot of crash engineering courses when I first came to the astronaut office, and I have done a lot of robotics through the years. 99% of it has all been successful. But the ones that are a little different really change your outlook on how you interact with a robotic system. So taking back a little bit, before I flew, this is my NEMO crew. The NEMO is another awful NASA acronym. It's NASA Extreme Environments and Mission Operations Analog, whatever. But it's basically living on an underwater habitat on the seafloor off the coast of eastern Florida. And we were simulating partial gravity like you would find on the moon or Mars, and what surface rovers could do for us. And in particular, we wanted rovers to be able to go places and do things that we didn't necessarily want to send people out to do. So to keep people out of harm's way, or maybe to do something a little bit more effective. Lo and behold, the rover failed, and we had to actually go out and get it. So we had to save the rover. We had asked them if we could try to fix the rover, and the people on the shore said, absolutely not, that's our baby. We engineered this picture just to scare them a little bit, but so we weren't really fixing the robot. We weren't messing with it at all. But the reason they didn't want us to touch it was because it was actually a very sophisticated system, and we weren't qualified. We didn't really know about it. We were just users. And you think about it, if you're off in space and you've got a robotic system, you got to be more than a user, because there's no one else up there to fix it but you. So you really want things to be reliable. Another day, Expedition 19, this is my good friend Koichi Wakata, and one of our Japanese astronauts, really top-notch, a really good friend, but also just one of the best in the business. And we were testing a new control algorithm for the big station robotic arm. And that is a big arm. Again, it's 60 feet long. It's pretty formidable. It can do a lot of things, and we were testing a new capability for it, and we brought it to a stop. We were flying it manually, and we're looking at camera views here, and it came to a stop, and great, that part of the test is done, and we were looking down at our displays, and all of a sudden we glanced up, and it was moving by itself, which was really weird. There was no commands given to move, but it was just doing it by itself, and it's a little bit panicky because you got this big 60-foot arm out there. You don't want it to run into anything, either to damage itself or to damage your pressure shell. So we were rushing to the emergency stop, and the ground called emergency stop, and we all saw it. Now, in reality, we had it magnified on a TV view, so it didn't move more than about this. But when you see that big of an arm up close moving uncommanded, really gets your attention. So as we were coming up with this new control algorithm, we found something we didn't anticipate that was inherent in the software that moved it. So it's really scary when you see that happen. Obviously, nothing big came of it. Another day, when I was the chief robotics officer during the shuttle mission, STS-133, and I was flying the arm from the inside at our magnificent cupola, where there's a robotic workstation, there's this incredible panoramic view of the outside. And I had my friend Steve Bowen, the submariner guy I was talking about, and he was out in the spacewalk, and he's the guy in the suit on the end of the arm. And we were flying him around to recover a failed pump module, which he had done, and so now he's holding it, and I'm trying to fly him from one point to another, and the arm froze, just stopped. Everything shut down. And so he's stuck out there on the arm, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on, and the ground didn't know what was going on. And they said, you got two choices. You can try to reboot the system where you are, or you can bring up the other system in the lab where you have no direct views, only cameras. Your call. And usually the ground wouldn't give you that, but they really didn't know what was going on. And so I chose to bring up the other system because I didn't know whether this failure would happen again, because we didn't understand it. So it took about 25 minutes or 30 minutes when my friend Steve Bowen was just hanging out there on this highly redundant, highly efficient, very well-proven arm, but it had done something to us that was totally unanticipated, and we didn't understand. So, it was one of those things where you think about the reliability of a system and how we like things to fail. So we have a saying at NASA and throughout actually operational venues, fail operational, fail safe. Meaning if there's one big failure, you want the thing to still work, so it's operational. That's why we have two complete control strings, two motors. If there's two failures, you want it to fail safe, so that it doesn't hurt anybody, like go crazy and start moving around and hit your pressure shell, for instance. So, both of those were at work. It definitely failed safe, and then we were able to bring it up again and went on about our business. But it tells you something. It tells you that systems that we design over years and test and test and test, and then have field history with can still surprise you. When the stakes are high, those surprises can be very, very daunting. So I think hopefully you're hearing this, that reliability, maintainability, those are really critical factors of a robotic system. So you don't want something to work just barely. You want it to work all the time. So that means you build and test and test and test, and then you build and upgrade and test and test and test. So whether you're in space or on the ground, this is something you really need to do. Now, as I think about this concept, I wanted to show this picture. On the lower right is a plaque that's in the floor of the control room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And these guys managed the deep space probes, Galileo, Magellan, the Voyagers. So basically, they would build and control systems that were never, ever going to be seen again by humans. They launch it on the rocket, and that's the last they see of it forever. And the stakes are high, it's very high profile, and they're never going to see it again. So they have to build that way. I'm building this thing so it's going to work for years under all sorts of conditions, and it's never going to fail. So that's a level of redundancy, of criticality that we kind of aspire to. And these guys are really tough people. I was actually working a payload with these guys, the Cold Atom Lab, and I thought it was an amazing payload, which I won't tell you about, but this team had already built the sky crane that dropped the Curiosity rover. This sky crane that hovered just above the surface and dropped the Curiosity rover on cables into the Gale crater on Mars, cut those cables, and then flew away from this thing. I mean, these guys were amazing. The system was amazing. It worked first. It worked perfectly. It was brilliant. And that's the kind of results you get from that really rigorous testing. So, okay, so that tells you that those systems can fail, and sometimes that's really critical. So really think about fail operational, fail safe. Now we'll just talk about some of the factors that are going to make that hard for you if you're building a robotic system in space. So factors that make both people and robots sweat. So weightlessness, for one. Weightlessness is really cool. It can make your life better in so many ways. It can also make it worse in so many ways, from putting things down and losing them to, well, use your imagination, learning to use a zero-gravity toilet. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you have to totally relearn and take into account because they work very differently. Same with a robotic arm. Now, a couple of points about these arms. None of them could lift their own weight on the ground. This magnificent 60-foot-long arm couldn't even get out of its cradle on the ground because it weighs too much. Up there, it weighs nothing. So the motors don't have to be nearly as strong, and that's a good thing. But boy, the dynamics of these things are quite amazing. So if you think about it, gravity also is a stabilizing force. It's a tonic stabilizing force. And when you take that away and you put a load at the end of an arm, a moment arm, it can really wobble when you move it. And so here, for instance, you've got a 22,000-pound cargo module at the end of that arm, a little bit of errant motion, it just wobbles like crazy. It's really quite amazing. Now, it's built into that. I mean, we know now how that's going to move, but we also have to be very, very careful about how we control it and not exceed certain speeds with it. Same is true with people. This is actually looking down at my boot. I was doing a spacewalk in the Russian spacesuit, and I was at the end of the Russian arm, and I'm actually straddling this arm between my two boots because there's no adapter plate for me to grab onto it with. And every time the arm moved, my friend Gennady Podolka was down there moving the arm around so I could get pictures of the antennas that we had just installed. And I was like a piece of bait at the end of a fishing rod. So every little movement was magnified up there. And I mean, it literally felt like I was going to be flipped off of this thing several times. So those are things you have to take into account just because of the lack of gravity and that tonic stabilizing force. Radiation is a big problem for us in spaceflight. Humans, robots, any kind of electronic system. So what is that? It's charged particles from the sun, from galactic cosmic rays, protons, electrons, alpha particles, from deep space galactic cosmic ray sources. We get really heavy nuclei, iron, for instance, which just carries a huge amount of energy. So from my standpoint as a medical doctor, I worry about hitting DNA, macromolecules, and causing mutations and causing direct cell damage. From a robotic system, you're worried about dense electronics, control circuits and whatnot. And we see this all the time. Electronics have a lifetime in space, and we have to harden them the best we can against radiation. And cameras pixelate. The best cameras we have are typically very dense CMOS chips, and they're good for several months to a couple of years, and they have so many dropouts in the pixels because of radiation that they eventually fail. So when you think about a robotic system, it also has to be hardened against radiation as well. Extremes of heat and cold. So it's very possible that if you're in the sunlit side and you're touching a piece of metal, it could be 150 degrees centigrade, so over the boiling point. And if you're on the shaded side, you could be minus 100 degrees centigrade. And so we go around the Earth, again, 16 times a day. So if you're out doing a spacewalk, you could be in one place where it's very, very hot, and then within a few tens of minutes, you could be in another place where it's very, very cold. Same is true with a robotic system. So think about hardening your electronics and your structure. What does metal do when it heats, generally? Expands, yeah, and you cool it. So you think about the expansion-contraction cycles that are going to happen. They're going to happen differently with different metals that are joined together. So your system has to be designed in a whole, in an integrated fashion to handle these things. Boy, space is full of junk, especially low Earth orbit in particular, orbital debris from spent satellites or destroyed satellites. What you see on the lower right there is one of our space shuttle radiators, which took a hit, just kind of a direct little micrometeoroid hit. And when you do a spacewalk on the outer station, you see that it's just pockmarked with little tiny craters. Mostly these particles are the size of a grain of sand, but they can be a lot bigger. So a robotic system that's out there either servicing other satellites or some of our new systems which are designed to clean up orbital debris are also vulnerable to these hits. So you have to be hardened to that. This is just kind of a nifty graphic which shows you the increase in junk, trackable objects in low Earth orbit since people first started launching things into space. So you can see it kind of starts about the time I was born and goes up and up and up. And then there's a sharp spike in 2007 when our Chinese friends basically shot down one of their own satellites just to prove they could do it. And they did. That was magnificent. But God bless them, they showered low Earth orbit with debris. And this debris field has caused a lot of grief for those of us that try to operate up there now. And including them, by the way. So it was kind of not probably as thought through as it should have been. But that was deliberate. And then you see the second spike there was a random collision between an active Iridium satellite, a telecommunications satellite, and a derelict, an unserviceable Russian Cosmos satellite. So debris is a big problem for us. And it's one of the biggest dangers that we have to the space station right now. Communication latency. Again, people and robotics have to deal with this. So the speed of light, also the speed of radio transmissions, is 186,000 miles per second, right? So that seems pretty fast, but our distances are also very vast. And so when you're looking at low Earth orbit, it's not a problem. We have real-time communication. When you go to the moon, it's 3 seconds round trip for a radio signal. So 3 seconds is right about on the border where you'd want to do any critical teleoperations, especially surgery. If you're doing telerobotic surgery and you have a mishap, you nick a vessel and it starts bleeding on you, boy, that's 3 seconds can be a really long time. It's a latency, and you're always dependent on your comm link not failing. Once you get further out, it's downhill from there. So Mars, for instance, at its closest approach is 35 million miles away. It's 8 minutes for a radio signal to get there. If it's farthest approach, 220 miles away, a million miles away, that is 40 minutes round trip for a radio signal. So there's nothing real time. You're not going to guide anyone through a procedure. You're not going to operate a robot autonomously or robotically yourself from the ground. Comm latency means you have to be autonomous, either a crew member or a robot, which implies some degree of AI, some degree of artificial intelligence so that it can make decisions when it's not being talked to. And then this is the basic thing. You break down when you're a long way from home. If you're a person, you have a medical problem, there's not a lot of doctors or no hospitals. If you are a robot, well, there's not a lot of technicians. They need to help each other. They absolutely do. So if you are going to Mars and you have a robotic system, you need to know how to operate it, how to fix it, how to maintain it. So it really raises the bar on all these things. So I'm going to end it here. The main thing when you think about spaceflight robotics is that it's a very synergistic relationship. We expect humans and robotic systems to work together, and it's going to make us better. We make the robots, right? Not the other way around. We do not fear the robots, but we count on them to be force multipliers, to make us stronger, better, give us presence in places that we couldn't be yet, as, for instance, advanced scouts. But eventually, we will be always working together. And the more autonomy we develop in both of us, the better we can serve one another. So hopefully all of you have seen WALL-E, which I just think is one of the best movies ever. Because you don't have to be a humanoid-looking robot to have personality, which I really enjoyed quite well. All right, last slide. Just by coincidence, about 3 weeks ago, I was in Guwahati, India, in the Assam state, and they had a science fair at one of the universities there, and lo and behold, a lot of the entrants were robotic systems that were developed basically in response to problems, social and technical problems that were inherent in the country. And I was very impressed by this because most of them were oriented towards agriculture or medicine or flood or disaster response. I mean, there were very real-world problems that these robotics teams came up with the solutions themselves and developed. Now, on the left, I'm joking about a little bit because these two young ladies, as soon as I pointed the camera at them, they just kind of went prison face there, but they were hilarious. They were just joking and giggling all the time, but they were also ingenious. This little thing they had created was called the entertainment chicken. And I thought, what good is that? As it turns out, there are many chicken farms where these two were from, and the chickens by nature would clump together, and they would just stay in one place, not move around, which meant that disease could spread easier between them, and they weren't exercising very much. And so they looked at this problem, and they came up with this solution. It's got a motion sensor on it and a couple and vision sensors on it, and it would literally just wade towards a mass of chickens and get them to move around and keep them moving very slowly. And I saw a video of this, and then they showed me data of the chicken's longevity and health and weight gain. There were a couple other parameters before this thing and after, and it was like a 30-something% increase in all these metrics with this simple little robot. And it was something they built very easily out of not very expensive materials. And it was a brilliant idea. I mean, so it was a very good application of simple robotics to a real-world problem. The team on the lower right, they had built this little device, which was actually a mine detector. Real-world problem in the northern border. And they basically built it light enough so it would never trip a landmine, but it would find it. It had several modes of detection, whether metallic or not. It would note it, mark it, record it with a GPS mark, and basically map a field. And again, it was very simple Raspberry Pi type electronic derivation, and you could build it for several tens of dollars. And again, a brilliant application of simple robotics, a very effective one to a real world problem. So I'll leave it with that. I'd really like you to carry what you're learning here out forward and really use it to apply to some of these real world problems. Okay, thank you. And I think we have a system of questions. If we're going to do it the same way, we're going to have you come down here. I'm looking for guidance. Okay, great. Yeah, of course.
Okay. While we're figuring out the mic situation, if you guys want to go ahead and start forming a line on this staircase, and we'll start taking questions in just a moment. Team members only, please. No adults. Team members only. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I can hold. Okay, you guys fix it. All right, who's first? Okay, I'm going to do a roll here, and you're going to say your whoever is your designated question asker, just say it into the mic, and I want to be sure everybody hears it, too. So, is that you? All right.
What are the struggles in space?
Wow, what are the struggles in space? A little question with a really big answer. So it depends. When we're on space station, it's keeping up with your workload because it's very, very busy, and learning to navigate in zero gravity and just to handle your stuff up there. Every day you're doing different experiments. You never do the same thing twice or 3 times. You just learn a bunch of different things. So that's one of the biggest struggles we have. But that's a happy struggle because it means a lot of different experiments. Okay, who's next?
So what's the budget that you have for your whole space mission?
What? Okay, the budget for your whole space mission, we don't really think of a mission-by-mission budget. It's more of a how much do we spend a year. And the numbers are, it depends on how you want to account for things. It costs us a little over $100 billion to build a space station. That's a lot of change. It costs us about $4.5 billion to keep it running every year. But we get a huge amount of science from that.
Do astronauts take extra specific medicine to help with zero gravity / lack of resistance issue to keep their muscles
and their body strong?
Okay, that is a great question. Do we take supplemental medicines to keep muscles and bones strong? We do not. The Americans do not. The Russians do. They're basically metabolic enhancers, and it's very interesting. Whether they work or not is a bit of a question, but they don't hurt and they might help. But we just use exercise and diet. That's a good question.
Is there any important types of data you need for like future takeoffs, like the sun radiation or stuff?
So every space mission, we collect a huge amount of data. We collect radiation data. Everybody wears a badge themselves. So I know my radiation. I know the radiation data from every module and on the outside of the station. So we collect a huge amount of that. Every piece of information that comes down from the station, we collect and save. So that's atmosphere, pressure, temperature. We do microbial counts. Yeah, there's reams and reams of data. Okay, you got it.
What do you miss the most?
What do I miss the most? When we're in space, we miss our family the most. Everybody thinks it's like hot showers and Chinese food and all that, but we miss our families more than anything.
Okay, who's next?
I have 5 kids, by the way. So.
My question is, what do you do for fun in space?
So where you are is so much fun anyway. Just floating is cool. Looking at the Earth is amazing. Playing with your food is a lot of fun. And just the work you do every day I mean, we never got bored in space. Having said that, when the cameras go off at night and we're no longer talking to the ground, we do have a bunch of stupid astronaut games we play. Some of them are like, if you push off from one module, can you fly all the way through a bunch of hatches and not hit anything? That's kind of fun. And I like to fly fast and just use your imagination on that one.
Have you ever experienced an injury, and what are your ways you fix or relieve injuries that you might get in space?
Have I ever experienced injury? Just minor injuries, and most of the injuries we have now are associated with the exercise we do, because it's very heavy exercise that you need to keep your bones and muscles up. I do remember, again, I like to fly fast, and I banged my elbow really hard not long before I was about to go do a spacewalk. So I was a little bit concerned about that, so I really had to change my exercise, and big bruise there, take some medications and go easy on it beforehand. But we really only have minor injuries going on up there, so not a big deal. It'll change when we go to Mars, though. There'll be more dangerous stuff.
What type of food do you eat in space?
Okay, the food is highly preserved because it's got to have many months to a few years of a shelf life to it. So it's freeze dried, it's canned, we have foil packed, we have radiated, and it's all actually very good. Every time a cargo ship comes, though, we get fresh food. So every 6 weeks to 2 months or so, we'll get apples and something like that. It's just garlic, which just smells really, really good up there. But for the most part, it's highly preserved. But the food is good.
Do you have FaceTime in space?
So we didn't when I was up there. We can't really connect to the internet because we don't want any direct connections that might infect the station's network. So there's a firewall connection that you can have. Now people actually can do internet searches with this very strong firewall in Houston. Not when I was there, but people can do it now.
How do you feel when you launch off of Earth?
When you launch, so a couple of things. Mentally, you've been training for it for a long time, and you're really psyched about it, but you're also saying goodbye to your family. So you got a lot of things going through your head. As soon as the engine's light, you're very task-focused. It's like I trained for years. I know exactly what to do. This is what I'm looking for. And so for that 8.5 minutes, you're just thinking, I'm on my way, and I know exactly what I'm looking for. And then all of a sudden, you're in space. The engines are off. And it's like, wow, I didn't expect it was going to feel like this. Just zero gravity, a head rush, fluid rush to your head. Things start to float around you. I mean, nothing can prepare you for that. But there's a lot of things that go through your head real quick.
How much time a day do you get to spend talking with your family?
How much time do you spend talking with your family every day? Every day is really busy, but I made it a point to call home every day. So a minimum of maybe a couple of minutes. And sometimes, like 10, 20 minutes. There are some folks who spend any free time they have talking to their family. So they might even talk for an hour and a half a day. I could never do that. Just didn't have the time to do it. But you can, because we have these telephone lines out. So it's pretty cool.
Is it possible to get rid of waste and human waste without throwing it into space?
You know, garbage is a big problem up there because every time we eat, we generate a lot of food trash. And really, no. Right now, what we do with that is we'll take one of the cargo ships that brings supplies to us. Those aren't designed to land back on the ground. We pack it full of garbage, and then we just let it burn up in the atmosphere. And it actually ends up being a really good way to get rid of trash for us. So that works really well. But eventually, we'd sure like to recycle more.
When you're sleeping at night, are there any things that make you feel uncomfortable?
Eventually, you get used to sleeping in weightlessness, and you sleep really well because the days are long. And when it's time to go to sleep, people are tired. For me, I'm a sailing freak. I love sailing, and when I'm sleeping on a boat, I wake up every 20 minutes, and I just give a listen, and yeah, okay, everything's fine. I go back to sleep. And I did that for 6.5 months on the space station. You wake up, you hear the fans, you hear no caution and warning, you just have this idea, okay, everything's fine, you went back to sleep. So for the most part, I did that, and I felt great.
How do you get good food in space?
How do you get good food? Okay, the cool thing about the International Space Station, international means you've got a whole bunch of countries bringing crew members or bringing food up there. And I had crew members from every agency. So when I was up there, I had Japanese food, Russian food, which is awesome, European, obviously American food. We had all the variety you could possibly imagine. And because of that, the food is better in space now than it's ever been. The variety is really, really high. So just because of so many countries up there, the food is excellent. Don't let any astronaut tell you the food's not good. So.
When something's broken, is there any way to fix it besides sending somebody out on the arm?
So that's a good question. If something breaks on the outside, usually we have 2 of everything that's really important. So if a pump breaks that circulates our cooling fluid, we'll say, okay, we'll command that one off, and then we'll command another one on, and then that one can do it. Every critical system we have, there's typically 2 and sometimes 3 of everything. And eventually we'll have to go out and fix one, but we don't lose capability with it. But sometimes that happens, and probably at least once a year we have to go out and fix something. But we fly a lot of spare parts. Anything that's important, we have spares. So, good question.
Do you have healthcare training if you're going to be an astronaut?
Healthcare training? Yeah, it's a good question. Every mission has 2 crew medical officers, and if we fly a doctor, it's easy, but a lot of times we don't. So an engineer or whatever, every astronaut has to take basic medical training, almost to a paramedic level, actually. So it's pretty good.
Did you have problems of debris running into your spaceship or debris coming in the way of your spaceship? And if you did, what did you do about it?
So we were lucky. We didn't get hit by anything big. And but when you do a spacewalk on the outside, you can see little craters everywhere. Most of the debris is the size of a grain of sand. And so it's like getting sandblasted. So you look at a handrail or something, you can just see it's rough. It's almost like it's somebody hit it with sandpaper because of all those things. And the interesting hazard isn't so much from getting hit by one of those things, is running your glove over a sharp edge, because if a micrometeorite hits a metal surface, it makes a crater. And around the crater is this razor-sharp metal edge that you can actually puncture a spacesuit glove with. So that's a very interesting hazard we didn't expect, but that's one of those things that space debris can do to you.
How did you tell the time in space?
Okay, great question. So because we go around the world 16 times a day, we can't be, we're not on Houston time. We have to just choose a time to be on. And we've chosen Greenwich Mean Time through England, basically, because it splits the difference between us and Russia and Europe and Japan the best. So we've just made that decision. Has nothing to do with sunrise or sunset, because those don't help you being 16 times a day. We just go on Greenwich Mean Time. And when it's morning, we turn on the lights. When it's evening, we turn off the lights.
How does it feel like to have no gravity?
At first, it feels really weird. When the engine's cut off, it's very abrupt. You go from 3 times your body weight to nothing. and you feel this rush of fluids to your head. It feels like you're hanging from the monkey bars, just hanging upside down. It feels exactly like that. It's kind of uncomfortable, and when you get into a big volume, you feel like you're falling in every direction. And so people are just hanging on like crazy. After a while, you get used to it, and you just start thinking in 3 dimensions and pushing off with one finger and, you know, flying across the station. After a while, you get used to it, but it's a little freaky at first. Yeah.
If you were sad in space, what would comfort you the most?
If I was sad in space, what would comfort? I mean, we have our sad days. Typically, it's when something breaks or something's going on the ground that you can't be at. So talking to your family makes you happy. I mean, I had the most incredible crew when I was up there, and we just had a blast hanging out together. So just having a longer meal together was great. Listening to music while you're looking at the Earth, there is nothing like it. I mean, the Earth is incredibly beautiful, and if you're listening to your favorite music while you're looking, that's pretty hard to beat.
What keeps you the most entertained in space?
The most entertained, I think for me, it was watching new people arrive on the space station who are getting used to space. Because I did that. I remember I must have looked really comical, but watching people stumble around and fly into things and bump their heads and stuff like that, that was very entertaining, I have to say, for a little while. And then they got better too. So, but that was, other than that, looking at the Earth. If nobody got bored, but if you get close to boredom, just look at the Earth. It's unbelievable.
Thank you.
What do you do for your birthday in space?
I actually had a birthday while I was up there. I woke up and my crewmates were wearing these really weird T-shirts that my wife had sent up ahead of time with them. I turned 50, by the way, in space. And so that's a big milestone. And they were very derogatory things about turning 50. And then I got to talk to a bunch of folks at Rosemary Church from CNN and various others who kind of said, "Happy birthday, is it cool to celebrate a big birthday in space?" And yes, it is. It was great. We took a little time off and had a special dinner. It was awesome. No.
Because you're going so fast in space, can you feel like you're going that fast in space because there's no gravity?
You know, you're inside a pressurized module and there's no atmosphere, so there's no wind resistance. And when you're inside, it's like being in an airplane and you're looking down. You don't really have the sensation of speed because you're inside. You don't feel the wind blasting through you. But when you do a spacewalk and all of a sudden there's no spaceship around you and there's between you and the Earth, you have this, all of a sudden you have two sensations. One is, oh my gosh, I'm going to fall to the ground. And the other one is you're looking at the ground go by so fast and you're thinking, wow, I'm really moving, because you have no spaceship around you that tells you you're inside, you know, a house, so to speak, up there. So it takes a while to get over those sensations. But otherwise, you know, again, you don't really feel the wind rush. I do remember after 6 months in space, and then I was on a small jet flying back. We were at like 35,000 feet flying back to Houston, and I looked out at the window. I thought, oh my gosh, the ground is close. It looked so wrong. So, you know, it's all perceptions and how we're fooled. Yeah.
All right, before we ask our next question, just a little housekeeping. If your team needs to leave, there are exits in the back at the top, and there is another staircase on the other side. We do need to make a single file line for questions so that people can use the staircase. Thank you very much.
How much bone or muscle do you lose in space?
How much bone or muscle you lose? If you exercise really hard, 2.5 hours a day, you might not lose any. But you really have to exercise hard. So, yeah, but if you don't do that, you're going to lose 1 or 2% of your bone mass every month. So a lot.
Do you see anything when you sleep, like through your eyes?
So one interesting thing that happens when you're trying to sleep is some of those radiation particles will hit the back of your eye, hit your retina, and cause a flash. And sometimes you will see those flashes, and they can be blotches or streaks, blue, yellow, I mean different colors. Well, not blue so much, but yellow and white. So you do see those once in a while. It's kind of freaky, and they're not harmful.
What does it feel like when you're landing?
When you're landing, if you're landing in a space shuttle, it's like an airplane landing with kind of a rough bump. If you're landing in the Soyuz, it's like a car wreck, to be real honest. But, you know, if you get down safely, that's fine.
How do you do a spacewalk when there's so much debris everywhere?
Well, the good news is it's still a pretty big sky, and you're a very small target in a spacesuit. And we've never had a spacewalker get hit by debris that went through the suit. So the biggest risk is when you have a really big platform like the station, because it's so much area, and it's up there all the time. You know, when we're on a spacewalk, it's only 6 hours. The station's up there all the time. So it's just statistics are with us that we're not going to get hit. We do worry about it.
Why did you choose to be an astronaut?
I chose because I had so many different interests, to be real honest. I loved oceanography, flying, diving, photography. I mean, nothing brings that all together like the space program. I get to do all of that as an astronaut, which is really cool. Not just fly in space, but living in underwater habitat, and I mean, I do some medicine. It's awesome.
How do you exercise in space?
We have special machines. We have a treadmill for running, and we have zero-gravity bicycles that give us a cardiovascular workout, and we have a very special machine that gives us resistive exercise. It's like lifting weights, but nothing weighs anything up there. You have to design very special machines for zero gravity. 2.5 hours a day of exercise.
Did you ever get nauseous?
You know, I did not. It happens a lot that people get space motion sickness, especially in the first couple of days of space flight. And it happens to about half the people or so, and I was lucky that I did not. In fact, we ate all the food in our the first couple of days, so yeah, I was feeling pretty good.
What do you think of how they dispose of waste?
I mean, right now, again, we burn it in the cargo vehicle in the atmosphere, and that's a good thing for us to do now. But when we go to the moon or further, we want to recycle that waste a lot more. So we're going to need systems to resmelt metals and reclaim plastics a lot better than we do now. So,
how long does it take to get used to these odd sensations you've been talking about?
So to get totally used to the sensations of zero gravity, if it's your first flight, it's 4 to 6 weeks before you're really good at it. If it's your second or third flight, just a couple days. When you're coming back to Earth, again, about 4 to 6 weeks. Before your balance gets good, your sense of motion control, position, mass handling, that takes weeks.
Did you ever pass out from experiencing so many Gs?
No. Interestingly, you pass out mostly when your G-forces go through your head to your feet. And when you're a fighter pilot pulling Gs, that's what happens. You're doing a tight turn. Those G-loads are going right from your head to your feet. And that tends to drain the blood out of your head. For us, the G-loads are this way, right through the chest. And it makes it a little bit hard to breathe, but it doesn't cause you to pass out. It's a big load. It feels like there's an elephant on your chest, but it doesn't make you pass out.
Do you get sick in space?
We had a cold. Somebody had a cold that came to visit us, and a bunch of us got colds in space, and that was no fun whatsoever because the snot doesn't drain. There's no gravity to help fluids drain. It just feels like your head is going to explode. But fortunately, that went away and was not too serious. But yeah.
If there was a zero gravity, or if there was a way to get gravity in space, do you think that would be a good idea?
So it's a really good question. If we could make gravity, artificial gravity, you could induce by spinning a structure. And so there's two things. Number one, we have the space station so we can study weightlessness. So we really don't want that up there. But if we're on our way to Mars and we're not just using it as a laboratory and we want to keep the people as strong and fit as possible, then you might do that. So we'd like to know how to give that artificial gravity. How much do you need and for how long every day? So that's actually a big point of study for us. That's a good question.
How do you protect against radiation in a spacecraft?
So protecting against radiation in spacecraft, the structure can give you some protection. But not very much, especially if you're in deep space away from our magnetic fields, which actually protect you a little bit. And so what you want to do is really reduce the time you're in deep space as much as possible. And how do you do that? If you're on your way to Mars, you want to fly fast. You want to get there as fast as you can, so you need really big engines, and speed is your best protector against that radiation, because we can't fly enough shielding to really protect you.
If you had VR in space, what would you do with it?
If I had a what?
VR. Virtual.
Oh, so interestingly, as I mentioned, from a long distance, VR isn't going to help you, but from a short distance, it could be amazing. So if you were orbiting Mars and you wanted to dispatch a rover, you could use VR to control that rover, as part of your telerobotics, so to speak, and that would be amazing. Or if you were in the space station and you wanted to fly a probe around on the outside, so you didn't have to go outside, that's something you could use a VR display for, a virtual reality display. And we actually train for spacewalks with a very sophisticated VR system. So we use it actually quite a bit.
When you're in space, what do you do when you're bored?
I was never bored, to be real honest. Some people have watched movies and read books and stuff, but I mean, where you are is so magical. If you get bored, there's something wrong with you, to be real honest. By the way, I took a science program to do, and I took a ship model to build because I'm a nautical history nut. I did none of that because I didn't have time.
What do you suggest is the best way to keep astronauts' physical and mental health in the best condition it can be?
So those are tightly tied. The more physically fit you are, the better your mental health. And a lot of us, that exercise break was the biggest mental break you could possibly get. So hard scheduling exercise, you will do it at this time, providing the machines to do it. That is absolutely the best way to stay mentally and physically sharp. Mentally, we also, talking with your families, getting care packages from home, that helps a lot too.
In space, did you watch any videos of your family?
I did. I had, again, I have 5 children, and I bought them a video camera before I flew, and they would send me clips of what they were doing and stuff, and the simplest things they were doing is what I wanted to see. So yeah, that was actually really helpful. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate how hard it is to live in space?
Sounds familiar from the last group, actually. At first, on the hardness scale, I would an 8 the first couple of days. By the middle of the mission, I would say it was a 1. It wasn't hard at all, easy. You just have to learn to do it. But to adapt, you have to learn and adapt. But living up there is no problem.
Did you watch any movies in space?
I watched one movie, and that was 2009. It was the reboot of Star Trek, the first Star Trek reboot with Chris Pine and Zach Quinto, if anybody watched it. I actually got to see it before it was released and wrote a review on it and set it down. So, but that was it. There was no time otherwise.
If you could make the time you had to exercise in your if you could make it in your sleep, would that help a lot?
I don't think so, because again, that exercise break is a mental break as well. It's the one time a day where the ground isn't calling you or talking to you, and you really look forward to it, and it feels good consciously to exercise. So I think most of us would prefer to keep it that way. Interesting question, though.
What do you wish you could bring into space that is prohibited?
My family. To be honest, I would just love to dork with my kids up there, to be really honest.
What might be something that happens in space that could invoke feelings of anger, sadness, or disgust?
Oh, geez. So I would, mostly the same things as on the ground. Problems with your family, problems with your coworkers and your work. For us, in reality, the hardest things are when things don't work. As I was explaining to the other group, we do science experiments every day, and every one is different. And every time you're attacking a new science project, it's somebody's work. It's years of work. It's millions of dollars. It's people's PhD theses. It's their careers. And it's all down to you. And the pressure's pretty high because of that. And when things don't work, that just makes you feel the worst up there. So I'd say that's high on the list.
What did you want to do when you first came back to Earth?
When I first came back to Earth, I definitely wanted to see my family as soon as I could. That was probably the big thing. I mean, we have a big family. We were very, very attached, but I did not want to leave the station. Interestingly, I was after, day 199. I wanted to stay in space. to be real honest. So it wasn't like I was anxious to get down and do something beyond seeing my family. And by the way, when I landed on my first mission, I was already assigned to my second mission. So I was really psyched. And my main thing was I want to go back, and I'm ready. So.
Did you ever want to go to Mars, and why?
Oh, I'd like to. You told me to go to Mars tomorrow. I'll go like that. Sure. Because it's a destination. It's a discovery. There's so many things that we know about it. There's so much more we don't know about it. It's much more interesting than we ever thought. There's water up there. There's flowing water. There's possibilities of ancient life, maybe even current life. I mean, we could make discoveries up there that would just be astounding. And I would say astronauts are probably happiest when they're seeing and learning new things for the first time. There's no astronaut I know that wouldn't want to go to Mars in a heartbeat. It's a place that we are going to go and we're going to learn a lot more about. It's just a matter of when.
What's your favorite planet?
Earth. My favorite planet so far. So far.
Planet other than Earth.
What's that?
Other than Earth.
My favorite planet other than Earth? So, oh boy, I try to keep this really short. When I was your age, there were 9 planets, very orderly 9 planets. Then they said, okay, now there's only 8 planets in our solar system, and people got upset. However, we have found thousands of planets outside of our solar system around other stars. Some of them even the same sizes of Earth-type planets. There's one system, the TRAPPIST-D system in Aquarius, about 40 light years away, where there are between 4 and 6 Earth-like planets. You know, so we don't know enough about them, except we know they're out there. The idea that there are thousands of planets out there that when you guys are my age, you're going to know about them is just astounding. So my selection choice is very short. Yours is going to be really long. So I'm going to ask you in 20 years that same question.
Did you eat any fresh vegetables while you were in space?
I did, because every time a new cargo vehicle comes, about every 6 to 8 weeks, the guys on the ground would put fresh vegetables or fruit in there for us.
Like package form?
No, literally, they would go to a grocery store, and then they'd find stuff, look at it really carefully, and clean it off, and then they'd throw it in the cargo vehicle. And it was amazing because even before you open the door, when you equalize pressure, you could just smell apple coming out of there. And I just remember that. It was so wonderful. So.
What would happen if you start bleeding in space?
Well, so if you did, you'd cover it and put pressure on it, and the bleeding would stop, and I can tell you that from experience. More interestingly, if you're doing surgery in space and you're trying to control bleeding, the blood doesn't pool anywhere. It just distributes over whatever it is. So if you get cut on your finger, it just starts spreading out over your finger in this even sheen. Or if you're doing, theoretically, if you're doing surgery, if you had the abdomen, or you were doing an appendicitis, an appendectomy, the blood would just kind of distribute over like that, just very evenly. The same way you do down here, but it behaves very differently up there. So, interesting question. Does that make any sense to you at all? Sort of? Okay.
What do you think was the most problem you had, like hygiene-wise, like with mouthwash and like brushing your teeth, or like you know, washing yourself?
Yeah, it was a good question. So hygiene-wise, getting used to no showers, no baths, we would literally use about 8.5 ounces of water per day per person to keep clean. That's it. And you can do it just fine. It's all managing sponge baths and whatnot. Probably the biggest challenge is washing your hair. And the challenging part of that is that you don't want anything to fly off of you, because anything that flies in the atmosphere you're going to breathe it, or it's going to hit something and just kind of blotch there. So you learned how to very gently wash your hair without releasing anything and then blotting it dry. That was my biggest challenge.
Are there other ways to brush your teeth without swallowing the tooth paste?
Yeah, it was about 50-50. We had the swallowers and the spitters. So I literally asked we have a space flight dentistry group, by the way. I asked them, what's the problem with swallowing your toothpaste every day for 6 months? They really couldn't come up with a problem, so that's what I did. But others spit it into a used small piece of gauze, and throw it away, which to me seemed a waste for a couple of reasons, so I didn't do that. But it's not a problem.
What happens if you have a bloody nose?
If you have a bloody nose, you do the exact same thing you do down here. You put pressure on it, and when the bleeding stops, it pretty well stops. And we'll use nose sprays that cause the blood vessels to shrink a little bit and not bleed. It has happened a couple times. But.
Does water rust in space?
Water? Does water rust?
Rust.
Oh, rust. Yeah, so we actually have to use materials that don't rust very easily because we worry about that. And it's water that might go onto a cool metal surface and condense there. So it's water in the air that condenses. And we had problems on the Russian Mir station where you could get a big glob of water up to a liter in size, and some of that metal would actually start to corrode or rust. So we have to be very, very careful of that.
Would it be possible to be like Iron Man in space, just like in The Martian?
Oh, it's definitely possible. I mean, when you fly up there without any kind of an Iron Man suit, you kind of feel like Superman anyway. So that's kind of cool the way you move. But a spacesuit makes you feel a little bit like Iron Man in a way because you're hardened and you have tools that can help you and you have displays and things like that. Probably not quite with the what we call the prop to mass ratio. I mean, the Iron Man suit just goes impossibly fast and is impossibly powerful and strong and whatnot. But, you know, in a small way, yeah, we're kind of there already.
How many hours do you think you sleep?
Well, for me, I worked midnight every night. I got up at 6 a.m. every day, and I did that pretty regularly for 6.5 months. Everyone's a little bit different in how they sleep, but for me, that was perfect. So.
What was your favorite food to eat in space?
Wow. Man, a lot of it was really good. Shrimp cocktail. It's dehydrated. It's unbelievable. Russian food is really good. The lamb stew in a can, it smelled like my grandmother made it. And there's a food the Russians have called tvorog, which is, it's impossible. I mean, we don't have any equivalent of it. It's like a kind of a cheese with nuts. Tvorog zarekami is cheese with nuts. And that was so good, we used it as trading chips. Like, I would clean the toilet for you if I get your tvorog, for instance. That stuff was just amazingly good. So.
What do you miss most about space?
I have to say 3 things. Looking at Earth, floating, just hanging out in zero gravity, and hanging out with my shipmates, because I just had the best crew ever. We had a lot of fun together.
Did you get to eat your favorite food?
I got to eat my favorite space foods. And my favorite foods up there are different from my favorite foods down here. But I ate very well up there. Food was awesome.
How does NASA capture space debris?
Well, right now we don't. We're formulating new technologies to get it. We've actually got an experiment up there now, which was a CubeSat, as we call it, which we launched out of the station, which is using a mesh, kind of a net, if you will, to grab debris. But it has to be big enough for us to track, find it, and rendezvous with it. But we're looking at a bunch of other options.
What are the major issues you face with space debris?
Well, the major issues is the risk of impact and losing pressure. So if you put a hole in that great big stack, the big space station, hopefully it's small enough that it only damages one module, but you got to figure out where it is. All you know is that the pressure starts going down. That's one of our biggest challenges is where's the impact? Where's the crater? Where's the hole? And so we systematically close hatches and look at airflow until we figure out where it is, and we'll isolate that module. That's a big challenge.
How do you go to the bathroom in space?
With a space toilet. So, okay. You know that like when you pee in a toilet, doesn't matter what flavor you are, gravity takes the pee down the toilet. We got no gravity, so that doesn't work for you. So we use airflow instead. So we have a hose with a funnel on the outside, and you turn on the fan so that it's got a suction, and you pee towards that thing. Accuracy counts. Yeah, I mean, alignment counts. It is bad citizenship to miss the toilet because it all goes into the atmosphere, and all your buddies are going to breathe it or get it on them or whatever. Now, what's more interesting is what happens after it goes in the hose, because, again, we recycle it. So it goes into the toilet, into a recovery manifold, into a distillation system, then a repurification, then a mineralization, and then it comes out to potable water faucet. And that's your Kool-Aid. So,
You do any experiments while you were in space?
I did experiments every day while I was in space. That's really the main reason we're up there.
What influence did your medical background play while in space?
What's my medical background?
What influence did your medical background play?
Oh, wow. So what influence did it play? So I had already written a textbook on space medicine before I flew. And my big question was, did I get this right? And being able to see what it's like to adapt to spaceflight was one of the most amazing parts of my life. I mean, to be real honest, I was about 85% right. And boy, that 15% was a doozy. The stuff that we learned that I didn't know, that the ground didn't know, we didn't know, is really quite amazing. We're still learning things every day. Having a medical background helped me look for those things in a way that otherwise I would not have been able to do.
NASA?
I think mostly because it put together so many things I loved. Earth science, ocean science, medicine, experimental physiology, flying, all of those things come together in the space program, and it's great.
So there's 6, like, crewmates on a
That's
station?
correct, 6 crewmates.
What are the jobs, the most basic jobs that they do on an average day?
So we would divide up the work. Everybody mostly did experiments, but then there were certain jobs that everybody had to do every day. So we had one person who was the watermeister, so to speak, and he made sure there was always potable water to drink for everybody and counted up all the reclaimed water. We had a foodmeister who managed all of our food. Everybody had certain jobs that they did just to make the camp run smooth, so to speak. And we got to choose those jobs pretty much. And so, yeah, it worked out really well. It was a good team. Everybody pitched in.
In your opinion, what is the most dangerous thing to do in space?
No question about that. The most dangerous thing is spacewalking. The EVA is extravehicular activity. So.
After going to space and coming back, what were like the problems and like changes you had with like, your family and people when you came back?
Changes in family. So it's not uncommon, just like a military person who deploys for a year and then comes back to their family. You've not been part of your family for a long time, and guess learn to get along without you really well. So again, 5 children, I'd come back, and then one of my kids was squirreling around and say, hey, you can't do that. And he kind of look at you like, you talking to me? So that kind of repatriating with your kids was a little bit harder. From my wife's standpoint, she had this really long list of things, the honey-do list as we call it. Say, we need you to fix this and get that and do this. And I also learned that when you're gone for 9 months, because I had to be in Russia first, when you're gone for 9 months and you land and your wife says, hey, I'm going to Hawaii, the answer is okay. So it's a gradual process of getting back in. But, you know, family was great.
Were you ever really homesick?
I was never really homesick, to be honest. I missed my family, but being in space is just amazing. And we savored every second of it.
Like being in space and like looking at Earth from like outside, did it change your perspective?
I think nobody is unaffected when you see your home planet just hanging out there in space and you see how thin the atmosphere is. You get this sense of beauty and fragility. You get an idea that it's the most beautiful thing in the universe, but the atmosphere is so thin and so fragile, and there's nothing else like it that we know, and it's the only home we got, and you just really want to take care of it. It becomes a much more precious thing.
What are some more important things to do in space other than exercising?
Well, the reason we're up there is to do science in low Earth orbit. So the ISS is a big laboratory. So we're doing experiments on medicine, on physiology, on combustion, fluid physics, radiation, genomics, all of those things that we can do uniquely in zero gravity. But eventually, the most important thing is really going to be exploration. Moon, Mars, finding out what's really going on there, what things they can tell us about our planet and how we might live there.
What are the pain points of the existing exercising machines?
What are the pain points?
Yeah, the pain points.
Pain points. Well, so the exercise that we do is really heavy resistive exercise. So it's like doing squats and heel raises. And that, I mean, that hurts your hips and your knees just like it would on the ground. But you really need those big loads to maintain your bone and muscle. So in that case, no pain, no gain, right? And it feels good, actually, to feel those loads. You float all day and that's fun, but all of a sudden you feel like you're on the ground again lifting weights, and it just feels good. So, next.
What is the most effective exercising machine in space, and what is the least effective exercising machine in space?
Well, the most effective, I can say without a doubt, is what we call the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, the ARED. And what that is it's kind of like a weight machine, even though there's no weights up there. It uses vacuum cylinders to push against, and you can do squats and heel raises and all sorts of lifts on that thing. And it's great because it feels good, and it's great because it works. We're preserving bone and muscle like never before in history, and that's been a quantum leap in our ability to keep the human body strong and able to come back. So,
what types of exercise would you do if you could do it?
well, what we do now, bicycling and running on a treadmill, we have a harness that keeps us down on the treadmill, by the way, and the weight machine, that's exactly where we want to be. I think with a very few exceptions, we're exercising every part of the body that we need to. One of the big exceptions, though, is the muscles that go along the spine and the back. And if we had a way to exercise those, that would be perfect. But we're pretty close.
Is there any other reason to exercise in space besides bone loss?
Well, bone and muscle both, and then aerobic capacity, keeping your heart and lungs in good condition. Because eventually you want to come back, and so you want to have good energy to do that. But really mentally, it's such a psychological boost to exercise. It's very good for the morale of the crew. Same is true on a ship, by the way.
How much water do you drink in space? And if you don't drink that much, would you become dehydrated?
As I reach for water, it's interesting you ask that. So typical allotment is about 2.5 liters per day per person. It's not that different from on the ground, but most people do drink less. For some reason, the thirst response is lower, and your circulating body fluid is lower. Your blood volume is down by about 15%. If you drink too little, you will get dehydrated, but the endpoints are very different up there. So it's a good question, but
since there's a lot of debris, how does it not hit your station?
Well, some of it does hit our station, mostly the little stuff. But if it's bigger than 4 inches in size, we can track it with radar on the ground, and then we sometimes actually have to move the station. The station has engines. And if we decide that there's a possible collision with a piece of debris, we will tell the guys on station, and then we'll raise the orbit to get out of the way, so to speak. So sometimes we actually do have to move the station.
How often has space debris caused a problem for you?
Fortunately, we've not had any really big hits whatsoever. But as I mentioned, one of the big problems is that if it hits a piece of metal on the station, it does make these razor-sharp edges, and that is a big risk. It's a big problem. And periodically, we'll find these little craters out on handrails on the outside of the station, and we'll put a lot of tape and padding over them so that the next person doesn't come and slice their glove and lose pressure on their suit. So that's one of our biggest problems.
Why doesn't NASA recycle rockets like SpaceX did?
Well, first of all, the rocket SpaceX is building, they're building for us. I mean, they're doing this with hundreds of millions of dollars of NASA money, and they can do things fast because they're not a government agency, which is great. NASA doesn't build the other rockets, really. We contract out to different companies, just like we contract to SpaceX or Boeing, Lockheed that's building our big rocket. We would love every rocket to be reusable, and I work with SpaceX every day, by the way. So that idea that they have is really good. It's the right idea, and they're perfecting it. And the good news is now they've shown other people how to do it, so other rocket builders are going to do it as well. It is absolutely the right thing to do. But again, remember that the space shuttle was reusable, and the solid boosters that flew would separate, and they'd fall into the ocean. We would pick them back up and use them again. SpaceX would land them on a pad, we'd land them in the ocean, but we used them again for decades. So the idea is a right one.
Thank you.
How do you get into the International Space Station?
How do you get into it? Well, you fly a rocket and you dock. You mean how do you get into the program, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if I understand your question, there's 15 countries. Each country belongs to one of 5 space agencies. Each of the space agencies has their own astronauts, and they choose them separately. So, like NASA will have a selection, Europe will have a selection. And then those people will train just as regular astronauts and go up as an integrated crew. You would fly either, well, for us, the shuttle, or for the Soyuz, eventually the SpaceX Dragon and the Boeing Starliner, and one of those would take you up there once your assigned mission came up, and you dock to it and stay there for 6 months.
If you don't have enough stimulus, what happens?
You worry about, if you really don't have enough stimulation, you worry about boredom and just performance going down. That never happens in low Earth orbit. But it might happen on your way to Mars. 6 months of nothing. So we're worried about that a little bit. So we will have a lot of exercise, and we'll probably move a lot of training to that deep space cruise phase as well.
When you were in space, what sound did you miss the most when you were on Earth?
That's a good question. What sound did I miss the most? I don't really felt like I was missing things up there, but when I came down to the ground, just the sound of wind through trees, I remember, wow, I missed that. That it really sounds good. The sound of other people's voices besides my crew, that was another big sound. So,
what would be your biggest problem going to Mars?
Biggest problem going to Mars right now is radiation, because it's many months between the Earth and Mars in deep space and lots of radiation. So that's our biggest worry.
How much color is there in your spaceship?
How much color? Well, so inside the spaceship, we actually have a bunch of people that tell us what colors we can use to try to make it good for the people inside from a habitability standpoint. But when you look at the Earth, I mean, the colors are overwhelming. So you don't feel color deprived at all. The blues and the white swirly clouds and the browns and the greens, the colors are amazing. So,
what will be the most difficult mental challenge about going to Mars?
the most difficult mental challenge about going to Mars, probably the fact that you're going to feel so detached because you're so far away, this distance phenomenon. You know, when you're in space for 6 months, but every time you look down you see the Earth, it just feels really close. Like you could get home in a heartbeat. And when you're on Mars, it'll be like a star in the sky. And that sense of overwhelming remoteness, I think, will be the biggest mental challenge.
What sights do you miss most besides your friends and family?
What
sights do you miss most?
Sights do I miss most? Boy, you know, again, when you're up there, you're not really missing that stuff. It's quite amazing because where you are is just so magical. I mean, it captivates you pretty well. When I got down, I just remember thinking, again, green, trees, bushes and stuff. I went from Kazakhstan to Star City, Russia, which is a forested compound by a lake, and just, nature. It was really nice to see that. So.
Just a quick reminder, the girl in the purple dress is the end of the line. Thank you.
So, is there something about Earth that you miss when you're in space besides your friends and family?
Again, not so much. Just because when you're up there, you're just so, I don't know, captivated about where you are, that it's not like you're sitting there thinking, geez, I wish I were on the ground. I was really happy to be in space every day. But again, it was good to be back to familiarity once I was down. So.
How does it feel to have all that blood rushing to your head?
It literally feels like somebody grabs you by your feet and turns you upside down. So if you find go find some monkey bars and just hang on those, it feels exactly like that. And it's really abrupt. I mean, your head just feels like it's puffy, and for a little while it's not much fun. You're stuffy and your head hurts a little bit. But eventually it goes away because some of the fluid goes down and redistributes and you feel better.
What is the most important item used in space?
The most important what?
Most important item.
Item? Whoa, your pressure shell probably. I mean, the pressurized module you're living in is by far the most important item because that keeps you alive.
What is the next destination you want to go in space?
Next destination I want to go. I have to say it's got to be a destination we want to go because nobody can do any of this alone. People argue about that all the time. What's the next best place to go? The moon, Mars, asteroid? And the answer is it doesn't matter. The best destination is the one that the public and the countries will support long term so we can really go do it. So I don't care. If you say go to the moon, go to Mars, I'll do either one. I said whatever you want. We just got to pick a place and go there. So it's a good question. You know, I said you're very task focused. When you're getting ready to launch, you've been training for years and really you're thinking about your job. But if you're not a little tiny bit scared, then you don't understand what you're doing or where you are. So yeah, a little bit.
All right, now we have some questions from the live stream, and that'll be it for questions tonight.
We have a question from team 20372 from Hood River.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to change or update systems within the shuttles or ISS? For example, updating the computer or audio-visual systems.
Okay, that's a good question. It's actually very easy because we have such a good broad bandwidth connection. We did with the shuttle and we certainly did with the station. And everything that's run by software is designed to be upgraded. So it's not difficult at all. We do that frequently. We do that a lot.
Do you have vision difficulties on or after your missions?
Vision difficulties. A certain percentage of people actually do have vision difficulties, and they actually change the shape of their eye and get high pressure in their brain. So some people have a lot of difficulties, but mostly they're just correctable with glasses. But it's a very interesting phenomenon that we didn't even know existed until recently.
All right, I'm going to ask everybody on the floor to please go take a seat. Thank you.
Last question.
Sorry, guys.
How easy is it to maneuver and do stuff you have real touch sensation in the spacesuit?
Oh, in the spacesuit. It is difficult. When you don't have a good touch sensation because your suit is pressurized and you're wearing heavy gloves, it is not that easy to do things. And so you have to train a lot. We practice in a pool with a full, real spacesuit, and it's still very difficult. It's something you have to learn to do.
So I want to thank everyone who came out tonight, and I want to thank everyone who tuned in on the live stream. Thank you very much. And thank you for the great questions. Thank you, Dr. Michael Barrett, for joining us tonight, and thank you, OMSI, for hosting us. If you would like to come up and meet Dr. Barrett, please form a line on the stairs.
Nice
Thank you.
That's okay. I salute your control. Okay, are you guys on the same team? Yeah. Awesome. What's the name of your team? Wait. I like it. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Wait, aren't you not supposed to do explosions in space?
We definitely want to avoid explosions in space. Yeah, why?
Hey, it's really fun to watch an explosion on TV.
What's your name?
Preeti, P-R-E-E-T-H-I.
E-E?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try to do this so I have time to give everybody a personalized one. Come on. Sorry. Whoa. Nice recovery. Thank you. Okay. All right, there you go. All right, Miss Explosion, what's your name?
Nidhi, N-I-D-H-I.
I don't know if you know the story, but doctors have really bad handwriting, right? So, that's my story.